This morning's Pledge of Allegiance is by Allie Baker, Priya Hartman, Lucy Hayes, Cody Howell, Titus Humphreys, Autumn Long, Rowan McNeese, Josie Ogden, Mackenzie Fillmore, Adley Terry, Ava Wingard, Lake City, and they're from Lake City Community School in Lake City, Colorado, and they are guests of Representative McLaughlin.
Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Representatives Arndt, Becker J, Becker K, Beckman, Benavides, Bridges, Buck, Buckner, Carver, Carver, Catlin, Coleman, Covarrubias, Danielson, Escar, Everett, Exum, Foote, Garnett, Janal, Gray, Hamner, Hanson. Excuse, oh, no. There's no excuse today. Hanson. Harrod. Representative Harrod. Now I understand the producer.
Excused.
Putin. Humphrey. Jackson. Kennedy. Kraft-Arp. Landgraf. Landgraf.
Excuse.
Lawrence. Lee. Leonard. Lewis. Liston. Lontine. Lundeen. McKean. McLaughlin. Belton. Michelson Janae. Neville. Pabone. Pedersen. Rankin. Ransom. Ryer. Roberts. Rosenthal. Sane. Salazar. Sandridge. Sias, excused. Singer. Thurlow. Valdez. Van Winkle. Weissman. Willett. Williams. Wilson. Winkler. Winter. List. Young. Madam Speaker.
Here.
Thank you.
With 62 present and 3 excused, we do have a quorum. All right, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the reading of the Journal for Wednesday, March 28th be dispensed with and approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk.
All right, members, you have heard the motion. Everyone in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed signify by saying no. That motion passes. All right. Announcements and introductions. Good morning, Representative Kraft-Tharp. Did you get any sleep last night?
You know, I did.
Good.
Not quite enough.
Me neither. Not quite enough, but did get some.
But good to see you, and boy, did I have dreams. But I won't talk about those dreams right now.
And I won't
what I
ask you
am
what
going
they
to
were.
do is introduce our neighbors, our community banks. The First Bank of Colorado is here. Let's all say hello to them. I think it's right up here. They're all waving to us. Everybody could wave and say hello.
Hello. Thank you for joining us today. Further announcements or introductions, and that will be a $1 fine, Rep. Kraft-Tharp. Representative Lee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Despite a technical flaw in the calendar, the Judiciary Committee will be meeting at 1:30 today. We have House Bill 1269, Senate Bill 55, Senate Bill 169, House Bills 1176 and 1251 will be heard at 1:30 this afternoon. Thank you.
Further announcements and introductions. Representative Janal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And along those same lines, the Health Insurance and Environment Committee will be meeting at 1:30 today, and we'll be hearing 3 bills: House Bill 1182, House Bill 1284, and House Bill 1279. See you at 1:30.
Representative Lawrence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. There are some guests over here on the side of the chamber. We have legislative shadows today from the Leadership Program of the Rockies, and if they would like to stand up, we just want to welcome them to the chamber.
Thank you and welcome to the chamber. That'll be $1, Representative Lawrence. Representative McLaughlin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to say thank you for welcoming Lake City Community School. The kids you saw up here today are the entire 4th and 5th grade classes of that school. So it's a small school in there, but a mighty school. They do really well. So thanks for welcoming them here. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Welcome to the Capitol. Representative Arndt, good morning.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. Colleagues and friends of the General Assembly, please clean out your closets this weekend. We're going to have a professional dress women's clothing exchange on Tuesday night. Everyone can donate. Aides, interns, staff, everyone's included. And we're going to swap clothes. If you don't have anything to bring yourself and take away something. If you want to bring a lot and take away nothing. And what we're going to do with anything that's remaining is donate it to women transitioning out of prison who need professional dress or out of domestic violence shelters. So don't be shy. It's Easter weekend. Clean out your closet. Get your wives and girlfriends and sisters and aunts too. And we're going to have a nice time on Tuesday night at 5 o'clock in my office. Thank you.
Representative Arndt, do you have a second to chat about that? Minority Leader Neville. And Representative Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, if you weren't aware, the governor issued a proclamation today stating that today, March 29th, is National Federation of Independent Business Day. So if you see them around in the Capitol, please thank them. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy and really keep us humming as a state. So I think I'm not going to ask for the proclamation to be read at all, but I wanted to point it out so that you guys know that today is NFIB Day.
And also, small businesses in number are 596,210 small businesses. That makes up 99.5% of all Colorado businesses. That's 1.1 million small business employees, which makes up 48.6% of Colorado employees. We thank you for hearing this today and continue to support small business.
Further discussion. Representative Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, could I have your attention? Do you mind?
Representative Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, I come to the well today to answer the call of thousands of students who marched this past weekend. Thousands marched across this nation begging lawmakers to act on gun violence and school safety. Stricken with the fear of bullets, our students, our children, marched for their lives. After the Parkland shooting, we began getting tearful calls to our offices, all of us have, and emails asking us to do something to protect our students. Although many of us have responded positively to the student protests at the Capitol and the March for Our Lives movement, we can't just be supportive and praise student activism. We, the elected officials, must do something. The fact that children have to leave class to fight for common sense gun policy brings me to tears while making me proud. But on one hand, they shouldn't have to sacrifice their childhood and parts of their education for the legislature, Congress, and the President of the United States to put the safety of children above rhetoric. On the other hand, they are showing they have an important voice in our politics. They have a clear voice and an honest one. Our youth have a stake in local issues, and I believe they are ready to responsibly exercise the right to vote on those issues, especially on those that have a great influence on their lives. Now, I am more than willing to work on the ideas we receive from our kids. Let's raise the minimum age to buy military-grade weapons in Colorado. Let's create a better, more comprehensive background check and red flag system, but let us also give our students a vote. President Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president, and a famous victim of gun violence himself, is quoted in saying, "The ballot is stronger than the bullet." So this is why I've been working on a bill that lowers the age to vote in school board and board of education elections to 16 years old. School boards have the ability to work on the school safety part of the March for Our Lives call to action, and I believe students should be at the table as a voting constituency. I bring this proposal to you today to ask you to consider joining this effort. Now, let's be clear, members. Although we have done much work on creating policy that would give our young people an opportunity to participate in the voting process, we have much work left to do. We've listened to over 20 stakeholders who have voiced implementation concerns.
Just one moment. Representative Coleman, it's not usual that somebody will advocate for a bill during announcements and introductions. Representative Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is not a bill that I'm introducing this year. So I'll move forward past the bill. I'll move forward past the bill.
That counts as well, Representative Coleman.
All right. So what I want to do in that light is I want to recognize some young people who are here today. Additionally, today I'm joined by the students and supporters of this initiative who are interested in making their voices heard. I would ask that they stand to be recognized at this time. I'm honored they would be lobbying senators today on my behalf and calling and emailing all of you. Please consider this effort on creating more support for young people to be able to engage. Please stand to be recognized on this side of the room. Thank you.
Welcome to the Capitol. I think it's more important than ever that people are involved with the political process, and Representative Coleman, that will be $5. Further announcements and introductions. Further announcements and introductions, Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to tell everyone for your hard and long-lasting and very good work yesterday. We officially will be closed tomorrow.
All right. Further announcements or introductions?
I do know better. I do know better. Please forgive me. I wanted to ask you.
All right. Seeing no further announcements or introduction. Oh, I guess we do have another announcement introduction. Representative Hamner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I almost missed this opportunity, but I do need to call down the Capitol Choir because Representative Carver is going to be celebrating a birthday on March 30th. Did you know that, Representative Carver? And as is our tradition, when members have birthdays that fall during session, we serenade you beautifully with music from the very small Capitol Trio. Oh, here we go. Capitol Choir. Are we ready to serenade Representative Carver? Are we ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Representative Carver. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday. Further announcements or introductions? Seeing no further announcements or introductions, Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to proceed out of order for the immediate consideration of House Bill 1322.
All right. Seeing no objection, we will proceed out of order for the immediate consideration of House Bill 1322. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1322.
House Bill 1322 by Representative Hamner, Senator Lambert, concerning the provision for payment of the expenses of the executive, legislative, and judicial departments of the state of Colorado and of its agencies and institutions for and during the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2018, except as otherwise noted.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1322 on third reading and final passage.
All right, properly moved. Representative Rankin, Representative Hamner, and Representative Young.
Who's first?
One in the middle.
You go first. This is like last night, isn't it?
Representative Hamner.
It seems like we've never left. Good morning. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Rankin, Young, and I are very pleased to be bringing forward the long bill. We thank you so much for the incredible suggestions and amendments to improve our budget for next year, beginning July 1. There are many things we're very pleased about how that works well together. First of all, this team works very well together. Your three representatives from the House have worked very closely, very collaboratively, in a very bipartisan way to represent the interests and needs that you've expressed to us as your Budget Committee members. Also, the three of us work in a similar fashion with the three representatives from the Senate on the Budget Committee. And the Budget Committee is in a very unique position to have 3 House members, 3 senators, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans working on your behalf. I know there have been suggestions about how to improve the budget process, and I think that that is a conversation that needs to continue, especially now while it's fresh in our minds, about what has worked well in this process, what could we do differently for those of you who will be continuing this work next year. There's always an opportunity to reflect, think about better processes and improvements. One of the things that I most appreciate about this Budget Committee and about how the Budget Committee works is that we are in a very unique position to be able to see and get deeply involved in every single department of the state government, in every single, all of the complex work of all of your committees. We're able to look at that as a whole big picture of state government, to look at overlaps and gaps, and it gives us the opportunity to kind of look at how the departments not only work individually, but how they all work together or don't work together. And so that has been the most incredible experience for me as a member of the Budget Committee. I'm very pleased with what we were able to accomplish in this budget. I think we've talked about that before, but I just wanted to use this opportunity to highlight our critical investments in our K-12 system, our transportation infrastructure, our state employees for our investment in the para unfunded liability issue. We've been able to fund significant dollars in human service needs, in our higher education system, in our state employees, and in our private providers of services. And we're very pleased not only with that, but with all of the suggestions that you had to make the budget process and this budget package even better. So with that, I don't know if my colleagues have some other comments they'd like to make, but it truly has been an honor to work with them and with all of you through this process.
And speaking for the other side of the aisle, which you can hardly ever discern when you're listening to budget hearings, because we work together very well, I think this is the best budget I've seen in 6 years in the legislature and 4 years on the Budget Committee. It's very bipartisan. The rising economy, the dramatically improving economy, has allowed us to have additional money through various mechanisms to do some things that we were not able to do in the past. We fixed some of the big glaring deficiencies in transportation, made great strides in education. We've also been able to address the rising importance of school safety. I think that was wonderful work we did yesterday. But we've also fixed a lot of smaller issues that have come up along the way. So a lot of people have benefited. Those people that we need to take care of in our state, the most needy, we've done wonderful work to improve, hopefully improve their quality of life and the people that support them. I particularly want to thank the staff. I think this is Director Ziegler's 24th year, 24th budget, and he is represented by Mr. Neiman this morning. These people have literally gotten almost no sleep for the last few days. You may not understand it, but they have to take everything we did, reconcile that to a clean budget to go to the Senate. So they did that last night. So we just can't thank them enough. Many of you have worked with individual members, and you know how good they are at really analyzing the departments and helping us think innovative ideas. And I particularly want to thank my 2 colleagues here. I mean, this is our 4th budget together, and their last. Might not be my last if I can hold out for another 1 or 2, but it's just been great. We've become great friends. We work together in a very collegial, nonpartisan way. It's a really different job, probably, from most of you, and I'm just honored to be a part of that. But I particularly want to thank the 2 of you for the 4 years of work.
Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Photo op.
Okay.
Where's the camera? Well, goodness, I don't know what I'm going to say after you've already given a standing ovation. So, but I want to echo. It's been a pleasure, and really want to call out the great leadership of Representative Hamner on the Joint Budget Committee, and your leadership as well on the committee, because actually these things don't happen unless everybody comes together as a leader and works. And we have articulated all the great accomplishments in this budget. And I think we should be very proud of those things. I also want to call out the fact that in the big picture, we represent people. And a lot of times I think we get into the middle of this process and we talk about programs and departments and how we make them better. But, and it's easy to have that happen because we work in a one-year budget cycle. But I challenge all of you to think a little bit about the bigger picture and take a step back and think about what you do to represent the constituents in your communities. Because at the end of the day, what we really care about are improving their lives and the outcomes that they have as a result of the budget work that we do. And I'm very proud of the work that particularly Representative Rankin has challenged us to do on the Budget Committee, and that is, how do we really determine whether we're making a difference? How do we really assess the quality of the work that we do? And so that's my challenge to you as you move forward as a General Assembly. Many of you are going to be back again. Keep that focus, keep the big picture, take that step back and think about, are we making a difference? And how do these investments that we make in our budget each year, how are they making a difference in everybody's lives? And if you can keep that focus, I think we'll continue to be successful as a General Assembly and as a state. So thank you.
So we urge a yes vote on the budget.
Yes. Yeah, got that. Yeah.
Vote yes.
Please vote yes.
Further discussion?
Okay.
Seeing no further discussion? Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Please close the machine. With 42 yes votes, 22 no votes, and 1 excuse, House Bill 1322 is passed. Co-sponsors. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Just to the next bill. So you only did proceed out of order for just that one bill. So if you want to read those first parts, that first part over, you'll have to do a second motion. How do you want to do that? You can just proceed out of consideration. The rest of it. And just read them out loud. You don't even have to say just the rest of the calendar, starting with. Okay.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to proceed out of order for consideration of the bills beginning with House Bill 1340.
Okay, seeing no objection, we'll proceed out of order and begin with House Bill 1340. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1340.
House Bill 1340 by Representative Hamner, House Senator Lambert, concerning transfers of money to be used for the state's infrastructure.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1340 on third reading and final passage.
All right, that has been properly moved. Representative Leonard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would just like to point out to members before voting on this a third reading, this is a bill that came over as an allocation of $495 million to be used for transportation. It was amended last night to allocate that money in a completely different way than was originally intended. It's now 25% to the counties, 25% to cities, 15% for multimodal. Now leaves 35% for the intention that it was originally intended. Ladies and gentlemen, you can't do construction projects of the magnitude that we need in Colorado by taking large sums of money and parsing them out to groups to be able to handle. And even though these are states or counties and cities that are now allocated a portion of this money, but it's the same problem that we've had year after year after year. We are not giving attention to our roads and our highways in a significant enough manner to make a difference for the majority of Coloradans. In our Tier 1 list that has 9 billion projects, these projects are on it. I'm not going to say that they're not going to get done, because they can get done by the towns and the cities and the counties. However, in the concerted effort to be able to have an efficient CDOT operating to correct our roads and highways and perform maintenance, this needs to be done in a much more prudent manner. These monies should have been allocated toward the first payments of a very large bond issue so that all these projects can get done in an efficient and economical way. So on this bill, since it's changed so dramatically from whence it had started, I would urge a no vote. Thank you.
Further discussion, and Representative Pabon will be acting Speaker Pro Tem.
Madam Speaker. Oh, Representative Hamner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And colleagues, House Bill 1340 from the Budget Committee recognized the fact that we have come together as a House and a Senate in terms of setting aside significant dollars for addressing a portion of the magnitude of Colorado's transportation infrastructure challenges. The way House Bill 1340 originally came to us was in terms of setting aside those dollars for Senate Bill 1, not knowing whether or not Senate Bill 1 would pass. And so the way the bill is written before it was amended recognized the fact that Senate Bill 1 might not pass, as some bills don't always make it through the legislative process. But we wanted to assure from the Budget Committee that the $495 million stayed in transportation. And so in the original bill, we have language that indicates if Senate Bill 1 doesn't pass, the money will stay in transportation, and so the bill parked the money in the State Highway Fund if Senate Bill 1 didn't pass. I'm not sure that was the right place to store those dollars, and I think it's really important for us to get this right. So I really do appreciate the dialogue and the debate. These are probably conversations that will go all the way into the conference committee. The amendment that was added to the bill clarifies the intent of the House in terms of where the House of Representatives would like to see those dollars. And I just wanted to clarify the original intent of the bill, leaving it open for more dialogue around how to distribute those funds if Senate Bill 1 does not pass. So thank you.
Representative Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. We had a pretty long debate on this bill last night, and my hesitation with this bill is the formula for how we're going to divide up that funding. I think setting aside a specific amount for a specific use does not help those communities outside of the Denver metro area when you're specifying what multimodal is. I think it's much more important to change that formula so that you're reflecting the fact that local communities have the control to spend money as they see fit. They know their communities, they know their area, they know what they need. We had an amendment run last night that would have changed it to 40-30-30. That would have given cities and counties more money. It would have given them more authority over that money rather than having to apply for a grant to use for a multimodal purpose. I think those communities know exactly what they need. If they need sidewalks for safe ways to school, if they need to widen shoulders on their roadways so that agricultural products can get down the roadway and allow space for other cars, if they need a passing lane. My problem with this bill is the funding formula. I recognize that we have finally made transportation a priority in this building, and I am grateful for that, and I know people around this state are grateful for the fact that members of this body have recognized that transportation and infrastructure needs to be a priority across the entire state. But we also need to recognize the fact that these local communities know what they need better than we do. And we should not be usurping their authority to make those decisions. We should let them decide how best to use the dollars that we're allocating. Not make those decisions from the Denver metro area. So while I strongly support the fact that we are finally transferring some money into transportation, I don't like this formula, and for that reason, I'll be a no on this bill.
Representative Melton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. And I just want to say that I rise in strong support of this bill and of the amendments that were added on. And I know that this is going to help out kids. This is, in fact, 15% of this is going to help out kids. Like the kids from Peace of Christ who are up in the gallery right now visiting from my district. And I hope that you'll all welcome me or help me welcome them here to the state capitol.
Representative Melton, while we welcome the children, that's not the time to do it, and we're going to have to give you a $2 fine. Welcome, kids. He's taking the fine for you. But let's keep the debate moving forward. Representative Weissman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. And, you know, members, I'm not on the Transportation Committee, and I haven't tended to be in the middle of these debates we've had here this year and last year. But as we debated this particular bill yesterday, and as we bring it back up today, some things have been growing on me that I did want to say. When I talk to people in my district in East Aurora about transportation problems, yeah, they're frustrated about 70 and they're frustrated about 25, but that's not it. They're also frustrated about Quincy Avenue and Gun Club Road. And those are local roads. Those are roads that cities and counties have some responsibility over, so I think we need to put funding there too. And when we continually bring up multimodal transit, and when we speak ill of that, I want to call our attention to the fact that to call it multimodal makes a certain assumption and even connotes and implies a certain privilege. Because some of us have a car and are able-bodied enough to drive it and to pay to repair it if it breaks down. And maybe we can take the bus or the train instead if we choose, or call a rideshare or whatnot. But you know, there are folks, including folks in my district, who don't have a car or are one breakdown away from not being able to drive that car because they can't pay for an engine repair or maybe even an oil change. Or they may be older and not physically able to drive, or for that matter, they may be younger and not physically able to drive either. So multimodal may be the only mode that they have, that some of my constituents have, and frankly, some of all of our constituents have. So I think the amendment to 1340 that came on this bill last night recognizes the diversity of transportation needs and challenges that we have in this state. And it recognizes the fact that not everybody has a car of their own and the wherewithal to keep it running and keep gas in the tank, like I think most of us do and tend to assume. So let's acknowledge all of the needs that our constituents have, and let's fund all of them, and vote yes on this.
Representatives Winter and Madam Speaker.
All right, thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. And members, we respectfully ask for your support of this piece of legislation. I would agree that we have to do more, and I heard those concerns came up, that we have to make sure that we are empowering local communities to be able to problem solve in their areas. And when this amendment went on, we are giving half of the dollars that are available through the set-aside to go towards local communities. It will empower them to be able to invest in a variety of different ways, and they have a lot of flexibility when it comes to that. When it comes to the multimodal fund, that is above and beyond that 50%. And so there are communities across the state, including communities in rural Colorado, that may be able to be eligible for even additional funding. And when we think about the growth that we have had in the state of Colorado, it is more important than ever that we are making sure that we are adequately investing in transportation funding, but we have to do it in a way that really organizes our roads, not just to move cars, but to move people. And Coloradans are frustrated with the challenges of traffic congestion. They are frustrated when there's not enough maintenance going towards potholes and there's damage to their car as a result of them when they hit them. And this brings a variety of different communities together to be able to do what they need to. And also when we think about how competitive Colorado has been able to be when it comes to a thriving business community, including our small businesses, we must invest more into transportation funding so that we truly have an economy that works for all and not just the well-connected. With that, I would ask you for your support. I think we're going to continue to have conversations about the unprecedented amount of dollars are going to transportation funding, and we hope to engage you in that conversation.
Representative Winter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Members, this allocation funding ensures that we get the most dollars to the most people with the most flexibility to ensure that we are moving people and not just cars. The majority of this money is still going straight to roads and expansions and repair, but this also ensures that there's flexibility for the folks that don't have cars, for it allows local jurisdictions, and that small percentage of multimodal has matching dollars too, so it actually leverages more money, draws in more money, allows for better solutions. It does impact our economy as well. When I was a city councilor, we'd go to businesses and ask them why they were in the Denver metro area, why they were in Westminster, what we could do to keep them here. And when we were recruiting businesses, do you know what? They didn't ask us how many highways we had. They asked us, how many transportation options do you have? What's the average commute time from different areas of the Denver metro area? It wasn't just about how many lanes, it was about how many options. This is good for our economy, it's good for local governments, it's good for cities, it's good for counties, and gives flexibility and reaches more people with more dollars, and I urge a yes vote.
Representative Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Members, as this was coming out of appropriations, I voted yes, because we had a blank slate
that we could have worked with here to get along in a thoughtful way to help all of Colorado. And I agree with what was said here. We should take into account all forms of transportation. But in order to do that, you should include all minds that are out there trying to figure this issue out. This formula that we have here is not respectful to rural Colorado. This formula absolutely sacrifices rural Colorado at the expense of the Front Range. There is a simple fix that is respectful and says we trust the people making these decisions on an everyday basis to make the decisions that are appropriate for multimodal transportation. Instead, what we've done, and you just heard, we have said we will take 15% and put it to multimodal, and guess what? Rural areas may get some of that money. I don't know about you, but we know the difference in here between may and shall. We deal with it on a daily basis. So why would we not take into account that may and make it a shall and allow them to make a decision on multimodal on their own in rural Colorado? But what you're saying is, I will take 15% of your money and I will put most of it in Front Range Colorado. Well, I hate to tell you, most of the state's rural. Most of the state is rural. And those same potholes that you're talking about are the same potholes we're struggling with. We need to fix roads and bridges. That's what we need to do. That's what we've been speaking about. That's what we have. To say that 15% should go to multimodal and rural areas may get that money is not fair. Why don't you let that decision be made? If you need multimodal in the Front Range, you give it to the city and counties, they can put it towards multimodal. You also give more money to the state. We can fight about that money at another date. I don't believe we hold rural areas hostage because we need multimodal money in the Front Range, because we have potholes as well, and believe me, we need to get things to market to the Front Range, and we're struggling to do that right now. I ask that you don't hold the rural areas hostage for 15% of this money when that could be used in rural areas to do good. And I trust the cities and counties to put it where it's supposed to. We have multimodal transportation and we put it together as a region. Let those commissioners and city councils decide that. But to say this was the thoughtful way to do it when you are absolutely saying rural areas may get it, well, let's be fair. Most of it will head to the Front Range at the sacrifice of rural areas. I ask you to vote no.
Representative Thurlow.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Good morning, members. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about this bill and maybe present a different view, that because I sometimes see things a little bit differently. I appreciate the debate yesterday, and I come from a kind of a semi-rural area. Grand Junction's a city, but we're located in the rural western slope. So the way I looked at the bill as it came over, and it was just a lump sum with no allocation, first of all, I think that's a good way to do it. I think, you know, Representative Leonard, I think we always complain that the JBC sends us stuff that we don't get to work on, and we should have a bigger voice in the decision. We did that with this bill. I don't know if it'll stay this way through the process or not, but we did that. For me, to have 25% go to the cities and 25% to the counties, I thought that was a victory for the rural areas, and I support that. The multimodal issue, I understand out in the rural areas we don't need the multimodal, or we don't want the multimodal. That's not how we view transportation. But I would also throw out the idea that if you look at the whole organism, the whole state of Colorado, because in the Front Range there is a density of population that drives that sort of decision. At some point it becomes more efficient to move people on trains and buses than when you reach a saturation point and you can't put more cars on the road or build more lanes, then you have to start looking at that kind of solution. So I would ask you just to consider the thought that maybe it doesn't hurt the rural areas if in the concept of the whole organization, the whole organism is more efficient by letting multimodal develop in the Denver metropolitan area. That might be good for all of us if we just make the state of Colorado transportation system more efficient. So I think I'll support the bill today. Thanks.
Representative McKean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. So there was one word, because I listened to a lot about what Representative Thurlow says. There was one word that was very important: let. If we let the multimodal system begin to work. This is not a let. This bill is a shall. This bill is a will. This is 15% that must go to this. One of the biggest arguments we have in my district is, when will Colt, City of Loveland Transportation, pay for itself? It never will. It's a sunk cost. And really, I think that's part of what we all have to get our brains around. If you're familiar at all with the New York subway system, almost all of those routes were private companies at one point or another, and they went bankrupt. The City of New York more or less inherited the subway system at no cost, and yet they still cannot provide that service at a profit because it does not do that. It is a sunk cost. So in the end, the conversation we're having here today is, what are we willing to suffer as a sunk cost in this process? Very much to Representative Becker's point, that needs to be a choice. That needs to be a choice as to how to use millions and millions and millions of our dollars in the best way our communities think they can. Not a forced percentage of the dollars that we commit to this process. Because in the end, it's the community's need that should drive that decision, not the state's. I think a lot when I sit back here about the arrogance of some of the things we do. And sometimes I think that the way that we decide this is where we're going to go, and this is how we're going to do multimodal, and this is how we're going to do this, is to some degree an arrogance of saying, we, for what works along the Front Range, are going to say this is what must work for you. That's not a choice. And when we're talking about these kind of solutions, I think choice is what we need. Representative Foote is probably smiling back there because that means local control. We all believe here in local control. But you know what? This is what's interesting, is this is an issue that is so varied across the state that it is not an issue of consistent statewide concern, because it does change. It is different. That's the humility I think we all should go into it with, is that this 15% is an important 15%. It's important to let communities decide how to do it themselves. I urge a no vote on this.
Representative Hamner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Colleagues, I want to remind you that House Bill 1340 concerns the transfer of money for the state's infrastructure. I know we're talking now about the distribution of the $495 million for transportation, but let me remind you that the bill also has all of our capital development projects that are being recommended to us for funding from the Capital Development Committee. And this is a year where I'm so pleased that the Budget Committee was able to accept all of the projects in the order that came to us for recommended funding from the Capital Development Committee, all the way up to $137.3 million. And these projects include upgrades at Colorado Mesa University, Fort Lewis College, Western State Colorado University, OIT upgrades, a project at Adams State University, a project for our youth services, a whole level 1 controlled maintenance, that's $15.1 million. So these are really critical projects and critical funding included in this bill. So I just wanted to make sure we didn't lose sight of the fact that all of these projects were also in this transfer bill. I ask for a yes vote on House Bill 1340.
Representative Gray.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to address a point that Representative McKee made, which I think is accurate. That by and large, most mass transit systems don't pay for themselves. They require funding from other places. But I'll tell you something else. Almost all roads don't pay for themselves either. Frankly, they're pieces of public infrastructure, and they're all important. We need roads and we need mass transit, but it's also sort of a false binary to say the mass transit isn't worth the investment if it doesn't pay for itself when roads don't get close to paying for themselves either. And I'll tell you this as one of the people from a very few communities represented in this room that actually do have roads that we have to pay for. In the North Metro area, we have some of the very few toll roads that exist right here. Most of your districts don't have them, and we do deal with them on a regular basis. And so we are helping to pay user fees for that the same way mass transit users do. But every single day that somebody who uses mass transit on a regular basis does pay a fare, that fare doesn't pay for the entire infrastructure. That's absolutely right. But for most of you, when you use roads every day, you don't pay a dime to use those either. It's just a few folks sort of up in the north area where we have asked to pay for roads, and we do on a general basis. But none of that is to say roads aren't important. Roads are very important. Folks in my district want to see it. We have a lot of road investment that we need to do, and I look forward to seeing that out of here. But generally speaking, we don't ask almost any piece of public infrastructure that we put in place to be paid for by user fees, and they're all worthwhile investments. And so I'm happy to support this bill.
Representative McKean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. So I always like arguments that I didn't make to have to answer. But I didn't say that the users of the roads pay for everything on the roads. But what I really did say, and I said it over and over again, and I made it really, it was a really good point. I'm just going to throw that out there, is that it should be a choice. And that really truly is the choice. Whether or not you drive a car and you buy gas and pay gas tax and pay some portion of those dollars toward your roads. Whether or not you buy a ticket on RTD and understand that you're paying some portion toward that. Those are all choices we make. What I'm suggesting is that the choices we force are the ones that lack humility in this House.
Madam Speaker.
All right. Members, thank you for this conversation, and I want to address a couple of points. First, the idea that this multimodal money doesn't go to rural areas is false. In fact, last year, when we were talking about this formula, we had a letter from a city councilor in Sterling, and I just want to read an excerpt from it. It said, in Sterling, 16% of our residents are over the age of 65, and this population will continue to grow in coming years with aging baby boomers. This group is particularly independent on our two regional bus systems, Prairie Express and County Express. Many kids in our community also rely on these services to get to and from school. Unfortunately, these buses don't run very often or have frequent stops due to our budget constraints. We're struggling to keep these programs funded and have trouble hiring bus drivers due to the infrequent schedules and unreliable pay. We've also looked into alternative options such as building safe bike and walking paths for kids to get to school. This could help my community solve many of our local issues because of the dedicated funding provided for multimodal needs. For smaller rural communities, we are not able to focus on important projects because there's not enough funding in our local budgets. That's from one city councilor in one town. And I can tell you that there are city councilors and county commissioners that are looking at this multimodal funding that allow them to better move children around, allow them to move the elderly around. And members, this is a mere 15%, and I would like to point out that in the highway fund, it was 10% dedicated towards multimodal. So this is a mere 5% increase for us to say that Colorado is looking towards the future, that Colorado is looking to be a state that does not only rely on roads to move our people around. It's a mere 5% increase while 85% of it can go to other projects. This is a vote for the future, a vote for moving people, a vote for being smart and strategic, and I urge a yes vote.
Representative Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Members, I always love it when somebody comes up here and reads a letter from my district and then blows it out of context.
Representative Becker.
Well,
There will be respect in the chamber.
I am respectful.
You just
believe
went
me.
after a member for her debate, so please keep it to the bill. Keep it to the
Here's the
bill, sir.
decision that we need to be making here.
Representative Becker, keep it to the bill.
Here's the decision that we should be making. When we're looking at context here, if we ask them, this is $75 million, by the way, or close to, that we're looking at here. If we ask them if you could be guaranteed the money and put it towards this project, or you may get this money if you apply for it, but you're competing against front range projects. Yes, my district's hurting. That's why I'm here fighting. That's why I'm here. To say that we would rather have a maybe than a for sure is not correct. And the other point that was made is that this is 10% usually, and now we're increasing it to 15%. Yes, my district could use this money, but they could use it as a guarantee so they can put it towards projects rather than a maybe down the road. So it does get me a little riled up when we're taking things. I understand it's a letter and we need the money, but I guarantee you they would rather have the guaranteed money than maybe competing against front range projects. Yes. So members, think of it that way. Thank you.
Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to point out that it seems like on this bill, the rural communities are not that excited about the multimodal dollars and very concerned that it will come to the front range communities. And I'd like to point out that we have been starving the Colorado Department of Transportation for so many years. Their budget is $1.3 billion. They serve 64 counties. There are 11 transportation commissions across the state of Colorado that are prioritizing roads and bridges that need funding. RTD's budget that provides 4.5% of the transportation for commuters around the metro area is double that. It's $2.5 billion. In the metro area, we have funded multimodal and transit very well. And if the urban or the rural areas are concerned that it's coming to the front range counties, I would say that we need to focus on what we have underfunded, and that's roads and bridges, because we have very generously funded multimodal, trails, parks and recreation, and transit in the metro area. I would ask for a no vote.
Representative McLaughlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I get up here often speaking on behalf of the rural districts that I know in Southwest Colorado. So I do not pretend to represent all of them, but I will say very strongly on behalf of my rural districts that multimodal is absolutely essential. And if we can give them money that says, yes, you can spend it on transit, maybe to take people to the doctor's office that they don't get to go to unless they get a friend to drive them, or sidewalks. You could probably do it if you just gave them a check, but this encourages them to think of everybody in the district and not just those who have cars. It encourages them to think about the older people that really, really need multimodal transportation. So I think some of you think that you know what multimodal is because you live in an urban area and it's those darn people riding bikes and taking up that bike lane. But in rural Colorado, it's absolutely essential. So please don't fool yourself into thinking that people in rural Colorado do not want or like multimodal. They absolutely do. Thank you.
Representative Leonard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. I do want to do a little 101 on multimodal. I was blessed to be able to work on multimodal projects when I was first starting in real estate in downtown Denver around Union Station, where we had buses and trains, light rail and heavy rail, come in and out, along with pedestrians that were able to come into it. I was also able to work on the first transit-oriented development when Cinderella City turned into a transit-oriented development along the very first light rail line down Santa Fe. But in my district, up in the mountains, a bus is called a bus. And it's like a big van. And so those are extensions of station wagons. And so when you had a lot of kids or you picked up neighbors, you went from a station wagon to a van and then a larger van and then these small buses. And then there's larger buses and they get like school buses. And you could have school buses move kids around from neighborhoods to schools, and those are called school buses. Now, I know the kids walk to the bus stop, and that's two different kinds of multimodal transportation. You walked and then you got on the bus. But when we say multimodal transportation, and then what we really mean are buses, we have those up in our area. We have RTD that makes a loop around, but we have RTD. We pay for RTD taxes. We have RTD buses, and those buses pick people up and drop people off. Multimodal is not all just about buses. So when we talk about rural areas, we just say the word bus. We don't have to say multimodal, because that's what Denverites talk about. That's what urban people talk about, because we're riding our buses, we're riding our bikes, we're walking to here. We take a 16-mile shuttle over to Denver Union Terminal, and then we take a train, heavy train to the airport, or light rail train to Golden. Those are multimodal forms of transportation. But otherwise, it's just a bus. And that's what rural people have always used to bring a lot of people to a specific place. So let's not get carried away with this word, even transit and multimodal. We can still have buses, RTD can still have buses, rural circulator buses can still pick up those who can't drive and take them to doctor's appointments or grocery shopping. We have that in our community. It's actually funded as an offshoot of RTD. We don't need to take CDOT money, as you heard, half the size of the RTD budget, and be able to use it for multimodal. We can work with RTD on buses. We can work in our communities on buses. But multimodal, and very big money for multimodal, is a very urban concept. And let's not be fooled when we use that word and try to pretend that it's for rural districts. Thank you.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. As many of you know, my district is very diverse, 4 rural counties and 1 urban county. One of those rural counties has benefited from CDOT multimodal funding when the ski train came back to Grand County to Winter Park. CDOT built the platform, I think at a cost of a few $100,000 was their contribution. That made a huge difference in the economy of that rural county. That multimodal funding to help fund a train was critical for the Winter Park area. In my urban area of my district, yes, we have buses, but I want to talk about school safety for a second, because the University of Colorado has the 2nd busiest RTD stop in the state, and people were crossing the street back and forth and getting hurt. College kids, so busy in the middle of traffic, and we used some multimodal funding to build an underpass and a safer bus shelter. That helps students. It's a bus. Sometimes it can be a bus, though, because in the winter, I go up to Winter Park almost every weekend with my kids, and we take the bus every day we're there to the ski area. I've got a bus in rural Colorado, a train in rural Colorado, an underpass and bus shelter in urban Colorado that all use multimodal funding. Those are all safety issues, circulation issues, convenience issues, economic issues, where multimodal funding helped two completely different parts of the state, two completely different economies. Multimodal funding provides the diversity of funding, the functional needs that communities need, and a lot of different benefits to different parts of the state in different ways. So we can talk bus, we can talk train, we can talk shelter, we can talk safe underpass for walkers and bikers and students. That's what's so great about this funding, is it meets a lot of the different needs of a lot of different parts of Colorado in a very functional way. So I ask for an aye vote.
Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Yes, we all do have different needs. And yes, this multimodal funding can meet those different needs in different communities.
Excuse me, Representative Jackson. Do I need to remind you that we are on third readings? Please pay attention and your respect to the well. Thank you. Please proceed, Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. So a little bit about my community, this urban community here in the Front Range in Aurora and Arapahoe County. Yeah, we've got transit. We've got great transit. And it's fabulous. But, you know, one of my colleagues got up here and talked about other people in our shared communities that maybe don't have access to vehicles. You know what? Some of them might not have access to bicycles. Some of them really need those sidewalks, because guess what? Even with the fabulous transit we have, there is this issue called the last mile. We need other opportunities to address that last mile. How do you get to and fro? And yes, it's not just a convenience issue, it is also a safety issue. And for many people in Aurora and Arapahoe County, it's the last many miles. We have a lot of growth, particularly in the southern portion of our county. You want to go south of I-70? Guess what? Those people in portions of the southern part of I-70 do not have access to RTD. Some of those portions would have to be annexed. So yeah, our communities are different, our communities have different needs, and our communities need this multimodal funding to address their varying needs. I ask for an aye vote.
Representative Salazar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. I'm a little split on this bill because I hear my colleagues from the other side of the aisle and their concerns, and particularly Representative Becker, because I've, as of late, been driving on roads all over the state of Colorado, and particularly up northeast. And I'll tell you that driving the roads northeast of Denver, I think my Jeep is still rattling in the parking spot. It's a very bumpy ride, and we're talking some major roads that need some serious repair. But something interesting happens after I leave northeastern Colorado, and what a beautiful place and great people there are up in the northeastern area of the state, is that I have to drive back into Denver. And the closer I get to Denver, obviously the more congested the roads get. And surely as soon as I get into my house district, it gets even worse. And if I have to drive from, say, Fort Morgan into Denver, which I've had to do a couple of times, once you hit Commerce City, it's a wreck. It's just a mess And in fact, it's actually extending up to Brighton. And that's why multimodal is much needed. My colleague from Littleton said, well, you know, multimodal is great, but, you know, we should start looking into other areas, and they're doing great in Littleton, and you're welcome, because it was people in the north part of Denver that helped pay for the transit that you have there, and we're still waiting for ours. I know this because there's a light rail station that's supposed to be a block away from my house, and number one, it's very, very late in being built, and number two, we actually don't know when it's going to be open. But here's the point. The point is that multimodal helps out everyone, even in rural Colorado, particularly those who are driving into Denver. We have a transportation crisis occurring here. I was commenting to my wife that when I first started at the legislature in 2013, it took me 35 minutes to get from my house 17 miles away here to the Capitol. And every off session, I rarely come into Denver. I try not to when I don't have to. But every off session, I don't get to see what the transportation is, what that looks like, until I come back into session again in January. And that following January, no doubt, has added about 10 more minutes to my commute, up until now, 6 years later, that it now takes me 55 minutes to an hour and 5 minutes to get into Denver, and that is 6 years later. And the reason why is because I-25 is a mess. And then once you get into Denver, Denver's a mess too. I mean, there seems to be construction all over the north part of Denver and the Rhino District and what have you, and you just can't seem to find your way through it. That's why multimodal is important, is whatever we can do to relieve the congestion on our roads helps out everybody in the state who comes into Denver, particularly those people who are driving in from rural areas. If we could get more people on bike paths, if we could get more people in rail, more people in trains, more people in other areas, and relieve the congestion from our highways, that benefits everybody. So I feel you. In the rural areas that, man, there's some work that needs to be done. There's some serious work that needs to be done. But y'all are driving into Denver, and you can see the crush of congestion that we have once you get here. And that's why I rise in strong support of HB 1340, is because while it may not be perfect and may not address everybody's needs, it's a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. And as some of you know, I'm a teacher. I work in a youth correctional facility, and so I teach Colorado history, and I know that since the beginning of our state, Denver has not been particularly popular. Some wanted it to be the state capital, some did not. So I know that slamming it a little bit is kind of fun to do, but I take it a little personally sometimes when people do slam our great state capital. We are a wonderful state capital. We have a lot going on here, so I do ask that we also be respectful of our wonderful city of Denver. But I wanted to point out two things in support of this bill, House Bill 1340, particularly the multimodal part. And this, again, relates to the whole state, and it celebrates our entire state when we're able to get people out there in order to make sure that people can go around the whole state by whatever means. And on that note, there's Pedal the Plains, September 14 through 16, when bicyclists are encouraged to go around the eastern plains. They'll be celebrating our agriculture and farming and ranching and getting folks out there to experience our rural areas, to make sure they see the wonderful work that's out there. I've actually done that myself. I'm not a cyclist, but I did watch some of the cyclists go by when I was visiting Weldona in that area with the Farm Bureau, and I got to see ranches and dairies and farms, and got to see the the cyclists go by. But I also wanted, the other thing I wanted to bring up, and I know this is also not Denver, but a lot of folks from Denver go up to the mountains and go to Aspen, for example. And up there in Aspen is something called RAFTA, the Roaring Fork Valley Transit Authority. And that is absolutely critical for the entire region up there. You have buses running from Aspen, Buttermilk, Aspen Airport, Brush Creek, Basalt Park and Ride, Willits. I've never heard of Willits, but you've heard of it now. El Jebel, Carbondale, and then West Glenwood Park and Ride. And that is critical for that region, one, to get people around quickly, to make sure that we don't have cars on the road also, so we reduce our congestion. But also there's an element of affordable housing. There is not enough affordable housing in Aspen. People cannot afford to live there.
Representative Rosenthal.
Pardon me, I'm raising my voice.
Bring it
I
on
apologize.
back to the bill.
Yeah, and the whole point of this bill is to make sure that people can get around without having to live somewhere. They don't have to live in Aspen. They can live in Carbondale. They can live in Glenwood Springs. And they can get to Aspen to clean the hotel rooms and operate the chairlifts and things like that. That's why RAFTA is so critical. That's why the multimodal is so critical in this bill. And I ask for your strong support on behalf of rural Colorado, even though I'm a Denver person, but I'm asking for rural Colorado to please support this bill. Thank you.
Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Good morning, colleagues, and thank you for letting me speak. I have to leave pretty soon for chemo. So I wanted to say we need to bring this bill back to the 15% that is going to be for multimodal. And thank you, Representative Leonard, for explaining what a bus is. My sister drives one of those buses for the seniors out of Springfield, Baca County. And as their state representative, I don't want to be the one sitting up here in this chair telling my county commissioners, my cities, what they have to use their money for. Set aside that 15%. Why don't you just have the money to where they can do whatever they need to with it? What did we do for rural Colorado yesterday? Representative Catlin tried to help the weed districts. Representative Ransom tried to help the courthouses. What did we do for them? Last weekend, when I went on the road trip to go to my county assemblies, I announced, yep, when I walked out of the hallway and decided to run 2 years ago, my pickup had 19,000 miles on it. I just traded it off and it had 92, and it's not quite been 2 years. There's a lot of roads. There's a lot of miles out there in rural Colorado. But ladies and gentlemen of the House, what did we do for rural Colorado yesterday? Think of that. So why are we setting aside this 15% for something that's already earmarked? Let the counties, let the cities decide. So that if that little bus that my sister volunteers for from Springfield, Colorado and Baca County needs money, let them decide. I'm not going to decide for them. I'll be a no vote, and I urge you to do something for rural Colorado. Thank you.
Representative Esgar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. I'm not going to argue the transportation pieces. I feel like we've had a lot of conversation about this. But there's something else in this bill that I just want to make sure that you all understand exactly what this bill also encompasses. There's a committee called the Capital Development Committee. We call it CDC. I've had members of this body say, we have a Centers for Disease Control in the state. CDC, friends. It's a committee made up of 6 people. It's bipartisan. It's both of our houses. We work through a binder. This is all of the requests we get every year of needs, infrastructure needs across the state of Colorado. We work on this as a committee year-round. You know when we're starting to look at projects for next year? The Monday after we're done with session. We're starting CDC the Monday after we are done with session. This year we were able to fund more than we ever have. Important infrastructure needs that impact every single one of our communities. I guarantee you if I go through this book, I will find something in every single one of your districts. We prioritize, we travel across the state to see these projects, and we work very hard for the people of Colorado and for the needs of Colorado and to be responsible stewards of the assets of Colorado. That's in this bill. You vote no on this bill and you're actually saying to the state of Colorado, we don't need to take care of our infrastructure. We don't need to take care of the assets that we have, the investments that we have made. Sorry to rant and rave up here about a committee that many of you sometimes don't know about, but it's an important committee that's done a lot of work and is reflected in this bill. I urge and I vote.
Is there further discussion? Representative Buck. You got a longer trip these days.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have to tell you, folks, I agree your binder is huge of projects. But I have to tell you, when I got elected, and I asked myself, what's the role of government? Education, transportation. If you look at that wonderful, wonderful little graph on government spending, ask yourselves, what have we done for transportation? Folks, it's coming to a head here. And we need to really step up. So I agree that, multimodal is not going to be the answer for all. We have so much needs just with the corridors. So I ask for a no on this.
Is there further discussion? Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem, and members, thank you for the conversation this morning. I know this was a bill that came up late last night, and we had a robust discussion then. This morning has also been very interesting, and I appreciate hearing the arguments for and against the amendment that we put on to the bill. It's unfortunate that there is not additional and more resources coming from the federal government. I was really hopeful that Colorado would have been able to have more support, and then I was hoping that transportation and infrastructure would be a big winner. But one thing that we have come to realize is that for the most part, the states, we need to problem solve on our own. And we need local communities to be able to problem solve on our own. And in a state like Colorado, where we have seen so much growth, this state has changed in ways that many of us would have never imagined. I grew up in North Glen and Arvada, and thinking about why so many people want to be in this wonderful state. It says something about our community. It says a lot about our way of life. And it also shows that we have an economy where there is opportunity. But to be able to make sure that we have economic opportunity and economic security for everyone, transportation is right in the heart of that. And I heard some arguments today at the well about choice. Well, let's talk about choice and the lack of choice. For people across this state who are doing everything that they are supposed to be, that they are working hard and still having a difficult time getting ahead. Let's talk about the single mother who has to rely on multimodal options to be able to get to work. Let's talk about communities like Glowville, Elyria, and Swansea, where there are people there that want to make sure that our air is clean in some of the highly polluted areas and communities across Colorado. And many of them who are in highly polluted areas, they're not living there by choice. They're living there because they can't afford to live in other communities. Let's talk about in some of our rural areas of the state where we have a tremendous amount of tourism, which is a wonderful economic driver for those communities. But let us also not forget the lack of choice for the service employees who can't live in the very communities that they work in because the cost of living is so high. So if we are going to talk about choice, let's also talk about the lack of choice for thousands of Coloradans that we are standing up for through this legislation. And members, one of the first values that when I became Speaker of the House and our House caucus focused on is that we don't leave Coloradans behind, and we don't take Coloradans for granted. And I represent downtown Denver and some of the surrounding areas. But I will say that if we do not come up with a statewide solution, I guarantee you, in the future, it's not going to be Denver that's left behind. Denver is going to problem solve in their area because they have the tax base to be able to support future investment into transportation. But the communities that are going to be left behind, it's going to be the communities that are not similarly situated. It's going to be the communities in the rural areas of the state that are left behind. And I appreciated the story that Representative Winter talked about at the well, because there are stories just like that across Colorado of locally elected leaders who support this formula because they know that they will receive an unprecedented investment going to local communities. And perhaps that's why CCI and CML both support this. And I heard a lot of arguments today, too, about may versus shall. Well, let's talk about the shalls. House Bill 1340 says that there will be $495 million that shall go toward transportation funding. House Bill 1340 says that 50% of that money shall go to counties and shall go to municipalities. House Bill 1340 says that capital construction projects across the state shall be funded and in your communities. And it says that we just don't talk about transportation funding, that our actions actually represent it. And if you want to walk away from supporting all of the shells in this bill simply because there is a slight increase for multimodal of 5% for one-time funding, it seems to me that we can and should do better. We should continue this conversation. But when we think about where we are at as a state and making sure that we have an economy that works for everyone, that means we have to organize our roads, not just to move cars, but to move people. I respectfully ask you to continue the conversation and vote yes. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Representative Humphrey, please close the machine. With 38 yes votes, 26 no votes, and 1 excuse, House Bill 1340 is passed. All right, that takes us, oh, co-sponsors, yes, cannot forget co-sponsors on that one. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. All right. I believe that takes us to House Bill 1323. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1323.
House Bill 1323, President Rankin, all Senator Moreno, concerning transfers of money to a newly created Office of State Planning and Budgeting, Youth Pay for Success Initiatives account within the Pay for Success Contracts Fund in connection with making an appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1323 on third reading and final passage.
The question before us is the passage of House Bill 1323 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Representative Lewis is excused. Please close the machine. With 38 yes votes, 25 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1323 is passed. Co-sponsors. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1324.
House Bill 1324, Representative Hammer, Elson, and Lumber, concerning continuation of the Governor's Commission on Community Service in connection with making an appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1324 on third reading and final passage.
All right, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1324 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Please close the machine. With 37 yes votes, 26 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1324 is passed. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1325.
House Bill 1325, Representatives Hannon and Rankin, Austin and Lambert, concerning measures to address coverage gaps in the statewide digital trunked radio system in connection with making appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1325 on third reading and final passage.
Question before us is the passage of House Bill 1325 on third reading and final passage. Representative Becker. Jay Becker, that is.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, we didn't get a lot of time to speak about these. I'm sorry I'm coming down on third reading to do this, but this bill concerns me just a little bit. And I know that the JBC we trust to do a lot of stuff, and I'm sure they had a lot of free time to pull this bill together and come forward. But it does concern me because this deals with the digital trunked radio system, which the CDC, I would say very graciously, took care of every one of their requests this year to try and upgrade this system and make sure the system's taken care of. And now we see a bill coming forward that gets another $2 million out of general fund to take care of controllers. And they would tell you that one is contingent upon the other. I will tell you that's not the case in here. I deal with this on a daily basis, these systems and how these systems work and what goes on. One is not contingent upon the other. And as we're looking at this, I believe that this really needs to come through the Capital Development Committee. We need to talk about it in that manner and use that money rather than your general fund money. I think that this is something that can get delayed till next year without harm to anything or anybody. We decided, I think, inside of CDC to deal with a microwave upgrade, to get towers set take care of every project they brought in front of us. When we were talking about controllers, which I believe this is somewhat about, they thought that that could be put off and moved into next year. So with this bill, in order to save some money inside of the budget and maybe use it for other things as we move forward, I would ask you to respectfully vote no, reduce some of the pressure on the JBC, which they need, and allow us to go through this in the CDC process next year.
Representative Esker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And this year, in the bill that we just passed, we just approved $7 million to go towards this project. And when OIT came before us on CDC, they didn't mention this part. And so I asked the staffer, the JBC staffer, where the disconnect was. And he said he's the one who realized that this was the piece that was also needed. So when I first saw this, and I didn't speak yesterday either because I was chairing, so I didn't come down to the well to speak on this, I had a little concern. We did a $7 million project through CDC, and now we're doing a $2 million project through the JBC, when this project should have come before us in CDC. Are we confused yet? This project should have come before us, so we could have vetted it, dug into it with what we do with the Capital Development Committee. However, I want to say that the Joint Budget Committee staffer who saw this issue did his job. And he brought it before the Joint Budget Committee and said, we need to fund this piece of it too. And I agree that we probably could put this off another year, but if we just approved $7 million for part of the project and it wasn't complete, whether that was OIT's problem, whether that was somebody who lost communication somewhere along the way, I don't know. But if we're going to fund this project, we need to fund the complete project. And although I may be a bit annoyed at how the process was a little iffy about part of it being CDC, part of it being JBC, I think we need to support this bill and move forward.
Representative Willett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I usually save these little disputes with John Becker for the back corner, but today I'll come down since it is thirds. You know, I'm going to be pretty simple here. I see public safety and I see a controller infrastructure on the western slope, and I all of a sudden get piqued attention. My understanding is there is some gap and there have been some emergencies maybe in the Montrose area. So while I respect CDC and a small turf war with JBC, I don't think we should let process trump, no pun intended, public safety in the western slope. So I urge a yes vote. Thank you.
Representative Rankin.
Well, of course, urge a yes vote. And let me start by really complimenting the Capital Development Corporation. I think we've developed a really good, smooth working relationship. And it's true, this is a little bit out of sync, but that's not unusual. It's more unusual this year than it has been in the past because we're working together very well. So, fine, let's accept a little bit of a glitch in that process, but this is essentially a near-term emergency need. There have been instances down in southwest Colorado where the coverage was not adequate for emergency first responders. So we got this request to fill an essential gap. It was well justified, well explained, and so we feel strongly that it needs to be done, and it needs to be done this year. So I ask for a yes vote.
Representative Hamner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, I also ask for a yes vote. Appreciate the conversation down here in the well. It was interesting to hear Representative Esgard talk about the communication breakdown possible between CDC and JBC. But imagine a communication breakdown when we have emergency responders who can't communicate with each other, who can't work together to protect the citizens they're trying to protect in the situation of a wildfire or some other kind of emergency on the western slope. There's a lot of territory on the western slope to cover, and maybe we should have invested in some of these DTRS systems for better communication inside the Capitol, but clearly this is an important need and ask for a yes vote.
Representative Catlin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I cover a lot of that territory over there in my district. And some of those canyons and badlands out there that we call home are a hard place to get out of with the radio. In fact, we had a sheriff's deputy from Montrose County that was involved in a shootout. And the person that was shooting at him ended up being shot and killed, but the deputy was wounded terribly. He could not get out of that canyon with his radio. So he drug himself into the pickup and drove himself to the top of a hill and made a feeble call for help because he was up high enough to where the antenna would get to him and get him back to the headquarters. That's not the only canyon that we represent over there on the western slope. This is an important issue. I'm sorry it didn't quite fit the process of the way things work. But emergencies never fit the process for the way things work. This is a good piece of legislation. I would urge a yes vote, and maybe we can get some of these first responders a little quicker action. Thank you very much.
Further discussion? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1325. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Please close the machine. With 45 yes votes, 18 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1325 is passed. Co-sponsors. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1326.
House Bill 1326, Representative Young, Austin, and Lambert, concerning support for persons interested in transitioning from an institutional setting in connection therewith making an appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1326 on third reading and final passage.
The question before us is the passage of House Bill 1326 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Please close the machine. With 63 yes votes, 0 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1326 is passed. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1327.
House Bill 1327, Representative Young, Austin, and Moreno, concerning the All-Payer Health Claims Database and connecting with the making an appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1327 on third reading and final passage.
Question before us is the passage of House Bill 1327 on third reading and final passage. Seeing no discussion, Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Please close the machine. With 38 yes votes, 25 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1327 is passed. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1328. 1329.
House Bill 1320.
It should be 28.
House Bill 1328, Representative Young, Senators Lambert and Moreno, concerning children's habilitation residential waiver program in connection with making, introducing, and appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1328 on third reading and final passage.
Question before us is passage of House Bill 1328 on third reading and final passage. Seeing no discussion, Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Representative Beckman, Representative Hooton, and Representative McKean. Please close the machine. With 62 yes votes, 1 no vote, and 2 excused, House Bill 1328 is passed. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1329.
House Bill 1329, by Representative Rankin Senator Moreno, concerning supplemental state payment to qualified providers of durable medical equipment who experienced decrease in the reimbursement of 2017 state fiscal years resulting in implementation of federal 21st Century Cures Act in connection with the banking appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1329 on third reading and final passage.
The question before us is the passage of House Bill 1329 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Representative Pedersen. Please close the machine. With 49 yes votes, 14 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1329 is passed. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1330.
House Bill 1330, by Representative Young, Senator Moreno, concerning a supplemental state payment related to certain Office of Minister Oncology related drugs for qualified providers in the medical assistance program, experience reduction in reimbursement payments in 2017 state fiscal years, rules on the implementation of federal final rules for covered outpatient drugs in connection with banking appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1330 on third reading and final passage.
The question before us is passage of House Bill 1330 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Please close the machine. With 45 yes votes, 18 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1330 is passed. Co-sponsors. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1331.
House Bill 1331, by Representatives Young and Rankin, Senator Lumber, concerning expanding the use of open educational resources of public institutions for higher education in connection with creating the Colorado Open Educational Resource Council, creating a grant program to support the creation and use of open educational resources, and making an appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
I just first want to comment on what a fantastic job Mr. Randall is doing, reading these very long titles in one breath. I move for the passage of House Bill 1331 on third reading and final passage.
The question before us is the passage of House Bill 1331 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Randall, please open the machine. Members, please proceed to vote. And for the record, we do not usually allow for applause, but in this case, it was well received. Thank you, Mr. Randall, for all of your hard work. Please close the machine. With 37 yes votes, 26 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1331 is passed. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1332.
House Bill 1332, Representative Salmon and Rankin, Senator Moreno, concerning creation of grant program to support collaborative education preparation initiatives to address the two shortages of Colorado in connection with making appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1332 on third reading and final passage.
The question before us is passage of House Bill 1332 on third reading and final passage. Seeing no discussion, Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Please close the machine. With 40 yes votes, 23 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1332 is passed. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1333.
House Bill 1333, Representative Young, Senator Lambert, concerning Part C, Child Find Responsibility of State Departments in connection with making appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1333 on third reading and final passage.
The question before us is the passage of House Bill 1333 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Representative Hooton and Pabon. Please close the machine. With 38 yes votes, 25 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1333 is passed. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1334.
House Bill 1334, Representative Hammer, Senator Lambert, concerning extension of the Transitional Jobs Program in connection with making appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1334 on third reading and final passage.
The question before us is passage of House Bill 1334 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Representative Singer. Please close the machine. With 55 yes votes, 8 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1334 is passed. Co-sponsors. 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 Please close the machine. Ms. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1336.
House Bill 1336, Representative Young, Senator Lambert, concerning the repeal of the local government retail marijuana impact grant program.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1336 on third reading and final passage.
Question before us is the passage of House Bill 1336 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Please close the machine. With 63 yes votes, 0 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1336 is passed. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1337.
House Bill 1337, Representative Tanner and Rankin, House Senator Lambert, concerning a Veterans One-Stop Center in conjunction in connection with making an appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1337 on third reading and final passage.
The question before us is the passage of House Bill 1337 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Representative McCain. Please close the machine. With 49 yes votes, 14 no votes, 2 excused, House Bill 1337 is passed. Co-sponsors. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1338.
House Bill 1338, President Rankin, House Senator Lambert, concerning transfers to address the reduction of revenues and severance tax operational fund.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1338 on third reading and final passage.
The question before us is passage of House Bill 1338 on third reading and final passage. Representative Foote.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and members, thank you. Forgive me, I was mindful of the time last night. We were doing this and trying to get this done by midnight. So there's been several people that have asked me about this bill and the amendment that was put on last night. So I wanted to explain a couple of things just so people understood. And I was mindful of the time last night, mindful for the time today as well. I know that we're tired from last night. But first of all, I understand why this bill is being run. I have to say I'm not a fan of the fact that this has to be here and this has to be run. What we're doing is we're taking $29 million for the next fiscal year out of general fund and put it towards things that the severance tax should be funding. And I think it's important for people to understand why we're here. It could have been worse. Last fall, during the Joint Budget Committee meetings and other discussions, it was brought up that the COGCC actually could have run out of money for its operating expenses as early as February because of the lack of severance taxes coming in. Now, this isn't because severance taxes weren't being assessed. This is because of the numerous loopholes that we have now in the severance tax code. So we have a severance tax rate that's along the same lines as many, many other states in the country. But what we have that's really unique here in Colorado are the number of immense loopholes that allow the oil and gas industry to not pay most of the severance tax that should be assessed. In fact, we have a percentage now, it's somewhere between 5 and 6% that should be paid, but because of the loopholes that we have in place now, the effective severance tax rate that the industry pays here in Colorado is less than 1%. Less than 1%. And members, when you look at the other states, that means that we have the absolute lowest effective severance tax rate in the entire country. When you look at severance tax, and it's very volatile, so it doesn't equal the same thing every year, but when you look at the severance tax that should be assessed and how much actually isn't collected as a result of these loopholes, it averages out for the last 10 years to be somewhere around a figure of $250 million. $250 million that is not being collected as a result of the loopholes that we have in law. So just to put it in context, when you look at our tax profile and expenditure report that I'm sure you all have looked at, us in finance, we take a look at that at the beginning of every session. We have in our law about $1 billion in tax expenditures, meaning tax credits or taxes that don't have to be paid on certain things. So we have $1 billion there, and $250 million of that, 1/4 is for one industry. 1/4 is for the oil and gas industry. They don't have to pay $250 million. So that's what we're dealing with here, and that's why this bill has to be run, is because the industry is not paying up to $250 million a year. Now, we do know this because that's in the information that we receive. There's some things we don't know, which was the point of the amendment. We know how much the ad valorem tax credit costs the state every year. It's, again, somewhere between $150 to $200 million a year. But there's other tax credits like the stripper well tax exemption and the new loophole that we have from the BP America decision that we actually don't know how much it's costing the state. We don't know that. And the Department of Revenue hasn't provided that to the legislature, individual members, and I think the Joint Budget Committee as well, even though they've asked. So when we're planning for the future and trying to figure out what the effect of these loopholes are going to be, at the very least, we should have that information. And that was the premise of the amendment. It's a transparency amendment. It's designed so that we, then the general legislature, should know how much we could expect, taking away the volatility of severance tax that we won't be bringing in that we could otherwise be bringing in if these loopholes didn't exist. It will help us plan for the future. It will help us decide how much should be taken out of the general fund and transferred over to Tier 1 and Tier 2 programs instead of coming from the severance tax. Now I understand, and I know, I'm assuming that my good friend from the Western Slope will come up and tell us that it's been the opposite in other years as well, that we've taken money from severance tax and put it into the general fund. And that's absolutely true. I'm all for transparency for that and for us knowing what we've done and everybody knowing what we've done along those lines. But it should go the other way as well. If we're taking money from the severance tax or what severance taxes should be paying for, like COGCC, Tier 1, Tier 2, and water projects, if we're taking money from that and putting it towards what severance tax should be paying for, we should know and be able to plan, or at least do the best we can to plan for the future and know what those tax expenditures are going to be. We should know what the stripper well exemption is likely to take away from our revenue. We should know what the BP loophole is likely to take away from our revenue. That's the entire premise of the amendment. And so I just wanted to explain that further, and I appreciate your indulgence, members. Thank you.
Representative Rankin.
That's a very interesting discussion, and one that we probably ought to pursue, and I actually would like to pursue it with my good friend, representative from Boulder. But it's not relevant, really, in my opinion, to this bill. This bill is about spending side and budgeting. It's not about that bigger issue of tax collection from severance taxes, which is a thorny and complicated issue, complicated by a Supreme Court decision and lots of legislation in the past. I think we should pursue it. That's not what this bill is. This bill is simply to take care of some very critical needs, in my opinion, many that should never have been charged to severance taxes in the first place. Past legislatures have used severance taxes very liberally for things that have no relationship to the impact of oil and gas. What we're doing here is merely looking at programs where real people are supported, critical needs like wildfire management, species protection, and we are making sure that those get funded. That's all this bill is. As I said last night, I don't think we have really analyzed the cost of this amendment or the difficulty of implementing it. However, I think we need the bill to make sure those projects like species protection, like wildfire, like conservation districts, and the very important things to my part of the state, that those get funded even though severance tax revenues are not available. Thank you for pointing out the balance sheet between severance taxes and general fund. Over the years, we have swept over $400 million of severance tax money into the general fund to cover things that have no relationship to energy impact. In the last year, about $100 million of that has been paid back because of the BP decision. The general fund has paid back some of those refunds. So, you know, I ask you to vote for the bill just because we desperately need to fund these very vital projects.
Further discussion? Assistant Minority Leader West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I realize lunch is coming, and it's been a long morning for all of you, so I'll be as brief as I can. There was a lawsuit on this issue. The parties litigated. Industry prevailed. It doesn't mean that the oil and gas industry has not paid its fair share. They have. But Representative Rankin is absolutely right when he talks about the fact that we have not been disciplined in terms of the way we have spent our severance tax dollars. Those dollars exist for a purpose. We have not been true to that purpose. As amended, I urge a no vote on this bill.
Representative Willett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm not going to speak to the BP case, but there was a bipartisan presentation this Wednesday morning at from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock by a lifelong oil and gas industry CPA and accountant, in which he went through the incredibly complex, tangled web of taxation. There are three basic levels. Conservation mill levy is the first, ad valorem is the second, and severance is the third. They're all very complex. They all have many moving parts. What's particularly concerning, there was, on top of all that, you have all these special districts, and now there was an example of one in either Larimer or Weld County that included something like 14 special districts. The total tax, if a producer were to drill the well, would be 49.99%. Half of all production would have to go to taxes. So my point is, rather than start trying to super slice one aspect and add more cost to the industry, we need to realize in the whole package, this industry pays plenty of taxes, and in fact are starting to look to other states where they can actually produce and make a reasonable return to provide cheap, safe energy for our consumers. Thank you.
Representative Hamner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, I do ask for a yes vote on House Bill 1338, even though the Budget Committee did not see the amendment or approve the amendment. I do appreciate Representative Foote being such a champion on these issues. And what House Bill 1338 does, it transfers general funds so that we're able to continue funding Tier 1 programs and part of Tier 2 programs. So it's really a critical part of the whole budget package. What I appreciate about Representative Foote's comments and the discussion here today is that we have to figure out whether or not we are appropriately taxing the industry, and that isn't what this bill is doing. It's something that I think is really important unfinished business for this body to take on and work together on across the aisle to figure out the answer to that question. Are we or are we not appropriately taxing the industry? Are they paying their fair share? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think Representative Foote is raising some really important questions that we need to wrestle with. Severance tax revenue is so volatile, it's almost impossible to budget to that volatility in the revenue source. We've talked about at the Budget Committee level spending the severance tax revenue in arrears to see if that would help build some more stability. But if we're threatened by not having enough revenue in the first place, how can we possibly build ongoing programs into a source of revenue that is declining and is so volatile? So I don't really have answers today for what to do next, other than it's going to be up to all of us to figure out a collaborative process moving forward. And I do appreciate that we can at least ask questions, ask for information to help us work together to solve some of these complex problems. But short term, please vote yes on House Bill 1338.
Representative Thurlow.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to clarify the term loophole is not any different than what we do with business taxation all around the state. Every business pays local property tax, and that's a deduction, that's a business expense, and it comes off their net income, and so it decreases the amount of Colorado income tax they pay. So the oil industry is no different than that. They have a more complex situation with ad valorem tax and local property tax. And then because it is so volatile, it's much more noticeable. A normal business, the price and the sales do not go up and down as fast. And then when an oil and gas company comes in and creates something, the tax lags the production for a while. So it's very volatile, and that's what creates this situation. But they're not loopholes in the sense that they're not special tax breaks for the mineral companies. They're local taxes that all of our communities are putting on the production, and they're doing it in a very different way. And maybe that's an issue that we should attack sometime, is trying to solve the inequities that it creates by the different tax rates. But the loopholes are not loopholes. They're taxes that other taxing bodies are imposing on the oil companies.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I rise in support of this bill for a few reasons. First, it funds critical programs that are important to my district and actually important all across the state. The Species Conservation Trust Fund, the Division of Parks and Outdoor Recreation Aquatic Nuisance Species Fund, the Division of Wildlife Aquatic Nuisance Species Fund, Mine Land Reclamation Board of Reclamation, Water Efficiency Grant Programs, Interbasin Compact Committee Operation Fund, the Water Supply Reserve Fund, and the list goes on. These are critical programs that right now their existing funding source is depleted. I also support this bill because Representative Foote's amendment gets to the issue of why is that existing resource, that existing fund depleted? And as a few different representatives pointed out, it's complex. We don't know right now why severance tax is so depleted, and Representative Foote's amendment is going to help us figure that out. We know there was a court decision that since then has meant a huge and very significant drop in severance tax. So we have to find out what's going on. This is not like other businesses. As one representative pointed out, other businesses get to deduct business expenses. Here, they get a tax credit, much, much, much more valuable than a regular business deduction. So let's figure that out. If it's so complex, let's just understand a little more. Let's have a little more transparency about the taxes we are or are not collecting in this area. So because these are critical programs, and because Representative Foote's amendment just means a little bit more transparency about the taxes that are being paid, I strongly urge an aye vote.
Representative Gray.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And folks, one thing I do want to note as far as some of the confusion and the sense that we're dealing with oil and gas operations that are suddenly within all of these special districts, and that's creating an ad valorem tax problem. I'll tell you one of the reasons why, in that we're developing oil and gas minerals more and more in more inhabited areas. And it's something that a lot of folks read about in the paper every day, and then for those of us where it's happening in our districts, we hear from our constituents about it on a regular basis. And frankly, in the time that I spent here, I feel like we've really failed to address in sort of a comprehensive way. But there are a good number of ways that oil and gas development is qualitatively different when it's happening in established neighborhoods and communities than versus when it's happening out in more remote areas. And the presence of special districts are one of those things. There are more special districts in inhabited areas. But it's also not to say that that's just some sort of mistake that those taxes are being paid, because those various districts and local governments that have higher local property taxes also do have direct impacts from oil and gas development. And some of those special districts, for example, would be metro area fire districts. Well, they have mill levies. And if you're developing within a metro area fire district, like the fire district in my district, for example, that part of that mill, there will be some tax revenue that eventually flows to that fire district. However, there's also immense new responsibilities that that fire district has to take on by bringing in oil and gas development into their neighborhood. They are also asked for emergency planning and crisis response planning and more responsiveness in case something happens to go wrong. And so it's not just, again, it's not a one-for-one thing, and it is a complicated situation, but the fact that more oil and gas development is happening in areas right now where there are special districts is not a bug. It is a natural consequence of new technologies bringing oil and gas development into populated areas where the risks of something going wrong are higher and the strains on local governments are more, because they're not just dealing with oil and gas regulation in a vacuum in an area that's further away. It's happening in more developed areas. And there are a lot of political conversations that have happened in this building and outside of this building about oil and gas development in residential areas versus other areas. And it can become very partisan and it can become very political. I will tell you, as somebody who represents a very moderate, very reasonable area, we have failed to actually address the fact that we have entered a new generation of oil and gas drilling and to reach the balance between those new technologies and what it is to drill in areas that are more inhabited. We have failed to address that over and over and over again because the politics around this are very difficult. But what you're seeing here, among other things, is that. And it's not going to go away as long as this development continues to occur, because that is where these special districts exist. These special districts exist in more populated areas. When this drilling happens in more populated areas, it does require more local government services. And so we do need to take a look at what we're doing and figure out how to actually address some of these concerns, sort of get past the initial sort of partisan political fight that we want to have initially and say, one way or another, we have entered into uncharted territory in many ways in the last several years with respect to residential drilling, and we need to actually take a look at it. We need to actually address it on behalf of the folks who are in these neighborhoods who present their concerns to us, for those of us who represent those areas. Thank you very much.
Representative Rankin.
So we've entered into a debate that I didn't really expect to get into this morning, but certainly one of my favorites. Yes, there is more impact in more populated areas. Drilling and production and impact in my area. I represent almost 100% of what's called the Piceance Basin, 3 counties, tremendous area, not very populated because mostly public lands. But let's get down to some numbers, and let's see if those numbers equate to what my friend Representative Gray is talking about. On the Front Range, the average deduction is about 50%, 49–50% of the severance taxes, and the deduction from these stacked up special districts. And they're not all fire districts. There's a lot of golf courses being built in special districts on the Front Range, and that money that would go to, is going to build those districts, those special district golf courses would otherwise be paid in severance taxes. So that, just think about 50%, right? In my district, it's 4% average. And the money that is collected on severance taxes is then distributed by a commission, and that is not taken into account. My citizens are really quite concerned that their oil and gas contribution is much greater in proportion to what they get returned. We should look at this. I agree. There's more impact on, when oil and gas is nearby. But this growth of those special districts has created a dramatically unfair situation in terms, because just think about it, my little towns and counties are not keeping those taxes at home and using them to the extent that the Front Range are. That's money that would flow into the severance tax coffers. So this is an area, I couldn't agree more. We really ought to dig into this and see what's going on with it. Thank you.
Representative Foote.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And actually, I just wanted to register my agreement as well that the way that our current system is set up, it gives the Western Slope governments and operators a short end of the stick, absolutely. And that's part of the reason why we want to make sure that we have more transparency. We know exactly what kind of deductions are happening, and hopefully we can also pinpoint it to geographic areas if possible, and make sure that we know that going forward. I wanted to just address 2 short things, because that's probably all I have time to do. One is that we heard a little bit about the total tax burden on the oil and gas industry, and the industry will admit that, or they should admit at least, that their severance tax liability is extraordinarily low, the lowest in the country, in fact. But then they come back and say, we have property taxes that are higher, we have other taxes that are higher. Even if you analyze all of that, in the state of Colorado, the oil and gas industry is still below the median in tax liability, below states like Wyoming, North Dakota, Texas, Oklahoma. They're below all of those. They have a very good deal here in Colorado, and we need to know more about it. And just think, severance tax actually is used in very productive ways in other states. North Dakota, Wyoming, and other states, for example, have set up a trust fund where they draw upon the severance taxes to fund things like transportation or higher education or other needs. We haven't done that. And if you take a look at the last 10 years, if you average the $250 million that the industry has not paid because of the various loopholes, for 10 years, that's $2.5 billion that this state could be using right now in trust to fund things like roads, to take out trans bonds for transportation, for higher education, whatever the case may be. We have frittered it away because we don't have things like that, and a big part of that is because of these loopholes, and part of the loopholes is we don't exactly know how deep those loopholes go. So that's why I wanted to explain a little bit about the amendment, and thank you very much for the opportunity, Madam Speaker.
Seeing no further discussion, the question before us is a passage of House Bill 1338 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Please close the machine. With 36 yes votes, 27 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1338 is passed. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1339.
House Bill 1339 by Representative Rangel, Senate member, concerning a requirement for fingerprint-based criminal history record checks for individuals with access to federal tax information in connection with making appropriation.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1339 on third reading and final passage.
The question before us is the passage of House Bill 1339 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Representative Buck. Please close the machine. With 60 yes votes, 2 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1339. It did switch on me there. With 61 yes votes, 2 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1339 is passed. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. All right, that takes us back to House Bill 1089. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1089.
House Bill 1089 by Representative Benavidez, concerning reform pretrial criminal procedures in connection with prohibiting the use of monetary bonding except for certain defendants and requiring courts to conduct timely hearings to reconsider monetary conditions bond under certain circumstances.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1089 on third reading and final passage. Oh, you don't have a Senate sponsor. Oh, we can't do it until the Senate.
Oh, I do. I just haven't given it. You didn't give it to me. You can't. Well, I can give it to you right now.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to lay over House Bill 1089, one bill.
All right, seeing no objection, House Bill 1089 will be laid over, one bill. Mr. Randall, please read the title of Senate Bill 170.
Senate Bill 170 by Senator Son of Argos, Representative McKean, concerning a water core process by which an owner of a storage water rod allowing water to be stored in new reservoir capacity may release water in an identified stream reach in a manner that protects the water release while complying with mitigation measures identified fish wildlife mitigation plan approved by the Colorado Water Conservation Board.
Whoa! Impressive.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of Senate Bill 170 on third reading and final passage.
Question before us is the passage of Senate Bill 170 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote.
It was right on my desk. Sorry. Thank you.
Representative Everett. Please close the machine. With 59 yes votes, 4 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 170 is passed. Co-sponsors. Please close machine. That takes us back to House Bill 1089. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1089.
House Bill 1089 by Representative Benavides, also Senator Fields, concerning reform of pretrial criminal procedures in connection with penalty use of monetary bonding, except for certain defendants and requiring courts to conduct timely hearings to reconsider monetary conditions of bond under certain circumstances.
Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the passage of House Bill 1089 on third reading and final passage.
Question before us is passage of House Bill 1089 on third reading and final passage. Representative Willett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Little buddy here. I will be changing my vote. I will be flipping from Judiciary. I appreciate, this was a tough vote in Judiciary, and there were some good amendments that you might recall put on seconds. We truly don't want people held in jail simply because they cannot post a small amount of money if they're not a risk to society or a risk of flight. I think this is narrow enough that we pretty much take care of that concern. Intellectually, we need to change the whole system, and it shouldn't be based on money at either end. You also shouldn't be able to post a huge bond and get out, because you could be very dangerous. So we should probably look at doing away with all monetary bonds. That would require a constitutional amendment. It's a complex problem. This bill comes at it a different way by identifying those very low-level crimes for which there are charges for which there will not be a monetary bond. So I am going to vote yes today, and I wanted you all to know that so there wasn't undue confusion. Thank you.
Further discussion? Representative Benavides.
Members, to join my colleague, this is a good bill. It really helps to not keep people in jail on the lowest level crimes where there's no victims involved. And primarily, it also helps us to reduce the number of inmates that are in county jails just because they can't afford a $100 or $200 bond. So please join me and support this. Thank you.
Representative Weissman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I really just want to give credit where it's due, which is to my colleague from Adams County for working on what I think might be one of the most consequential criminal justice bills that we do here this session. And I really just want to say two things that are very germane to conversations we have here repeatedly. One is we have in our minds, I think, the idea that if you are doing time behind bars, it's because you have either been convicted or you have pled. And for many folks, that is in fact not what's happening. This is the type of reform that Rep. Benavides is trying to address here. The idea that substantial numbers of people are spending a substantial number of days behind bars without having been convicted should really bother all of us, whether you are progressive or conservative or anywhere in the middle. That is really not how we do criminal justice. I don't think it's what our constitutional order contemplates. There have been cases around the country that are starting to challenge these practices. I think we are on the front end of a wave of these cases, and we are right to try to get ahead of it, not just to avoid the prospect of litigation against us or our subdivisions, but because it's the right thing to do. Another thing that we heard in committee is that collectively our counties are spending hundreds of millions of dollars detaining people pre-trial, again, who have not been convicted. I think by some measures it's more than half of inmates in some counties. It's more than half of inmates in some county jails who haven't yet been convicted. Stop and think about that for a minute. So it's time to start changing this, and I think this bill is a start in that direction. And I commend the sponsor, and I commend our colleague from the West Slope for coming up and speaking in support of it too. I think we should all support this.
Representative Van Winkle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My apologies for having to ask a question on third reading of the bill sponsors. I was not on the committee that heard this bill, but when we say municipal code violations and that falls under the purview of this bill, does that also include domestic violence in places like Aurora and Thornton and elsewhere?
Further discussion?
if you want to say something, say it now so she can answer to both of you.
Further discussion? Representative Buck.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did talk to the sheriff, Justice Smith, and it's my understanding, I guess, why is our nose getting involved in not only something that is the discretion of the judge, but, that's my question to you. I don't understand why we're going down this road when, is it our business as a legislature to do this?
Further discussion? Representative Carver.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I commend Representative Benavides for raising this important issue. It's a critical topic when we're talking about how we do reforms in our criminal justice system. Ultimately, the reason why I ended up voting against this bill in committee is while the amendments were helpful, it is my understanding that CCJJ is continuing to look at this issue. I think that is a valuable process. If you are not familiar with CCJJ, it is a broad group of stakeholders, prosecutors, defense counsel, victims groups that look at many topics in our criminal justice system and come forward with recommendations after a robust discussion from many different points of view. And so I think I have found that there is great value in letting the CCJJ continue their good work on this topic and to bring it forth through that process. The DAs and others involved in this ongoing discussion, while very appreciative of the amendments that have been made, believe that there are still some areas where we need further refinement in order to get that right balance on those offenses, those circumstances where we prohibit monetary bond, and those circumstances where the court, in their discretion, on a case-by-case basis, can still impose a monetary bond. So with all due respect and commendation to the extensive work done by Representative Benavides, at this point I would urge a no vote and hope that as we get the recommendations from CCJJ, we will perhaps have a more refined bill that gets us there. No vote today.
Further discussion? Representative Salazar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And as one of the two members of this chamber on CCJJ, I got to tell you that that process takes a while. I mean, you'll see bills come through CCJJ or ideas that will linger for years. And this is one of them. And that's why the interim committee was brought about, and this was discussed, and this idea came forward. Because, quite frankly, we can't wait forever. We can't wait for CCJJ to come to terms as to what it wants to do. That's why I like this bill, is that Representative Benavides understands that we just don't have time. Throughout the nation, we are seeing this practice being ruled unconstitutional. To put poor people in jail or to hold them in jail because they are poor is unconstitutional on its face. And the reason why we're interfering in it is because we've created this. This isn't judges' discretion. We gave this to them through statute. And that's why we're able to adjust things through statute. It is a very clear power that we have. You can take a look at the statutes if you want, where bail is located. We created that. The judges did not. And as a third co-equal branch of government, and actually we're the second branch of government, that's the checks and balances of it all. That we can tell the judiciary,
look, we don't see this as being effective anymore. And not only that, but we're concerned about unconstitutionality. That's why we're doing what we do. This may not be a perfect bill, but this is a really difficult systemic issue that we're attempting to unravel. I mean, we're talking about a system that's existed for generations. And that kind of system is complex. And we have to tip our hat to Representative Benavides and to the stakeholders for trying to unpackage it. I think that we're on a really good path. And no, not everything needs to go through CCJJ. We've seen so many bills brought from this side of the aisle as well as our side of the aisle that didn't go through CCJJ. So let's not do that. Would it have been better? Maybe. But it's not necessary. So, with all due concern to the Constitution, with all due concern that we are hurting poor people by holding them in jail just because they can't post a bond, I rise in strong support of House Bill 1089.
Representative Mark. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I really want to respect the bill sponsor too, and I mentioned this on seconds, but I will say, I mean, you just saw my vote on a water bill. First and foremost, I represent my district and my city, and we humbly for Collins thinks we have a pretty good system up there, and we're very humane. We treat people in the way that we'd like to be treated, so I will, with all due respect, be a no on this bill. Thank you.
Further discussion? Representative Buck.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And, you know, if it wasn't, and with all due respect to the Representative Benavides, you know, this would be no concern. This would pass 100%. And because there isn't a 100% support, I mean, honestly, I'm hearing a lot of things in my district, and truth of the matter is, with all not coming together in support or against or what have you, unfortunately, I don't think this bill is ready for prime time. So I will be a no, and I think we still need to look and work at making this better or tweaking it, but I'm not comfortable when a bill this important doesn't have a complete support from the district attorneys, from the courts, all of that. So I ask for a no on this.
Assistant Minority Leader West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I'm going to urge a no vote on this bill. I just want to clear up a perception. I think this did come before the interim committee last year. It's my understanding that the interim committee did not vote this bill out of the interim committee. And there's a reason why CCJJ exists. CCJJ has, and I'm proud to present and co-sponsor that bill this session to continue the work of the CCJJ, which we're encouraging to happen on a bipartisan basis. The CCJJ has brought forth a lot of legislation before us over the years. This is a difficult issue. They're still working on it. Let's allow that process to continue to work. Probably one of the reasons why the interim committee did not reach a consensus on this bill during the interim. Again, ask for a no vote on this bill.
Representative Melton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I keep hearing us talk about the CCJJ as if we need the CCJJ stamp of approval to pass something within this body. Well, I'm sorry, I don't need the CCJJ's permission to represent my community and to represent my district. My district didn't elect the CCJJ, they elected me. And they elected each and every one of you to represent them and represent their interests. Now, what this bill does is this bill helps out so many people who are already strapped, who already don't have any options, who already are facing an uphill battle, and it just levels that playing field out a little bit. So let's not hide behind the CCJJ to do what's right for these people. Again, the CCJJ does not have a vote in this body. We do. And it is our decision, our responsibility, and our charge to represent the people of Colorado. I ask for an aye vote.
Further discussion, Representative Benavides.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members, thank you so much for all of your input. I wanted to take a minute and answer a couple of questions. I think Representative Van Winkle had a question with regard to domestic violence. This bill does not apply to any crimes, whether misdemeanors or municipal charges, that have a victim involved. So they are the very low-level crimes. There was another question Representative Buck had with, is this taking on the court's discretion? Well, I can tell you, or not the court, but the judge's discretion, that right now there's something many of you may not have heard of. It's called a bond schedule. And if you get arrested, most of our counties have already prepared a bond schedule that if you're charged with certain types of crimes, you pay $100 or $300 or $500. So when you get arrested, you just pay that and then you're released. You don't appear before a judge, and a judge doesn't set that. This does not prevent the continued use of bond schedules. So the court determines those levels. They can still do that. So when somebody gets arrested, they can still decide, oh, I'm charged with this offense, I'm going to pay my $200, and I'm going to go home and come back for court. They never see a judge. They just pay the bond. And so this doesn't stop that, but the people that don't have the $200, they are the ones that end up in our jails. Our jails have anywhere from 50 to 75% of the people in county jails are called pretrial inmates, meaning they have pretrial detainees, because they have been charged, but they have not been convicted of anything. And in our interim committee, and it's absolutely true, we had one maybe bill that passed out. It was purely bipartisan. We didn't have enough time to really go through all of our bills and the pros and cons. So I think it's an important bill, and that's why I brought it. The issue with bail and discretion of the judge, in this bill, there's also discretion for a judge if they say this is a low-level crime, but we know something about this person, or they've had several failure to appear for court. The judge can hold those, and they can still impose a monetary bond, and that's in here. And then with respect to the CCJJ, I would be one of the first people to step forward and say the work that the CCJJ does is really good. But, you know, the chair and the vice chair are the head of the DAs and the head of the public defenders. And we have legislators, and they don't meet enough or spend enough time. And they just sent out a letter I read to all of us that it takes them 2 to 3 years to develop an issue. And this, and I agree wholeheartedly, this is a huge issue, our bonding statute. But this takes one small piece of that. And there's no reason we need to wait, because again, and you guys can pull it up, this week on public radio, there was another article about, or interview about the rural jails. And sometimes a judge isn't there for a couple of days. So these people are stuck in there and they can't pay the fine and get out. So this is a very small relief for the minimal level of crimes. There's no victims involved. So I would urge your support. Thank you.
Further discussion, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do want to try to provide a little bit more clarity with respect to Representative Van Winkle's question. Crimes that are covered by Colorado's Victim Rights Amendment or similar municipal crimes are exempt from this bill, and I wouldn't support this bill. I am going to vote for this bill. I wouldn't support this bill if it didn't. That's different than saying it doesn't affect crimes, that there are no victims in these crimes. Theft, for example, is a crime that is not covered by the Victims' Rights Amendment. I do believe if somebody steals your property, that you are a victim of crime. So, but we were talking about a term of art, which is the Victim Rights Amendment. Now, I will tell you that all acts of domestic violence are covered by the Victim Rights Amendment. So this would not cover an act of domestic violence in county court, district court, or municipal court. We're primarily talking about property crimes. Now, again, I am among those who believe that if somebody commits a property crime against you, you are a victim of crime, but you don't fall under the constitutional definition of the Victim Rights Amendment, which covers most, crimes of violence, domestic violence, the more serious crimes that are there. But what we are doing in this bill, if you would support this bill, is saying with respect to primarily property crimes and some other lower level offenses, we want to tip the scale towards saying we're not going to require monetary bonds that folks can't afford with respect to primarily property crimes. It's not a full thing. If this is your fourth time of being arrested for theft or you've failed to show up to court, the judge can still say, you know what, we have clear and convincing evidence that you should be held. But I just wanted to help make that distinction for people. We're not talking about, there are people, these are property crimes. I'm among those who would say if you're a victim, you can be a victim of a property crime, but domestic violence, crimes of violence are exempt from this bill. Again, it's not perfect, but it is, I think, a step in the right direction in addressing this, and I will be supporting it today. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, Mr. Randall, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Please close the machine. With 38 yes votes, 25 no votes, and 2 excused, House Bill 1089 is passed. Co-sponsors. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Madam Majority Leader Becker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to lay over the balance of the calendar till Monday, April 2nd.
All right, members, you've heard the motion. Seeing no objection and lots of applause, that motion stands.
Seeing for announcements and introductions. Representative, who would like to go first? Hamner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And colleagues, before everyone heads out today, I wanted to bring up Representative Herod and Assistant Minority Leader Wist. Last night we had a lot of debate around amendments and topics that related to the Department of Corrections. And these are our two colleagues who have stepped up and are members of the study group that's working right now to represent us in looking at a path forward for our plans for corrections. So I wanted to give them a chance to do a quick update. Thank you.
Representative Herod and Assistant Minority Leader West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Hamner and members of the JBC. Members, as you all know and can recall from our conversations before, we have had conversations about the Department of Corrections budget. We're going to have a quick conversation about that today because I didn't want to keep folks here last night past midnight. If you haven't noticed, my mantra of late has been that we spend too much money on prisons. The growth that we've seen in the DOC budget has been unacceptable. In 2015, the DOC budget sat at $808 million. Before that time, it stood steady with minimal bumps. Since 2015, however, we've seen steady increases. Today, the Department of Correction budget inches just away from $1 billion. Every single dollar that we spend on prison beds is a dollar less spent on other critical needs the state needs. Mass incarceration carries a huge price tag, and it's not just the dollars, it's the toll that it takes on people's lives. Earlier this session, just weeks ago, DOC came to us seeking a supplemental, claiming that its vacancy rate was nearing a critical low. Thankfully, we didn't capitulate. Upon closer inspection, we learned that DOC's vacancy rates was no better or worse, and actually was better than its 14-year average. The sky was not falling, and it is not falling. I applaud the work of my colleagues who are championing criminal justice reform legislation, pushing for presumptive parole, more use of community corrections, and sentencing changes. These reforms promise to decrease the DOC beds. I also want to thank my colleagues who questioned DOC's forecasting and budget. We now have this working group, which for the first time, perhaps ever, is taking a deep dive into DOC's budget. We can no longer give the Department of Corrections blank checks. There must be transparency and accountability. I know that the growth in the prison population is by far not the fault of DOC itself, but the department can surely do something about it. First, there are currently empty beds in community corrections that are staffed, funded, and the DOC can transfer inmates from DOC today. These beds remain empty. Second, there are thousands of inmates eligible for parole. They sit in prison. In fact, releases to parole have declined over the years. There is a shared responsibility for today's rise in the prison population. Filings are up. The war on drugs continues, and I don't think that our approach is winning. We cannot just build new prisons and add beds to solve these very complex issues. As legislators, we need bold reform. I want to thank my colleague, Representative Wist, as well as members of the Joint Budget Committee for diving deep into this issue. I also want to thank Representative Willett and Representative Lee for serving on the Prison Population Study Group and working tirelessly every single week since we brought this issue up. The work will continue. As you guys may have noticed in the Department of Correction budget that we approved just now and discussed yesterday, we have actually decreased and cut the request from DOC in half. We are on a better path forward, and it is in part thanks to the work of the Joint Budget Committee as well as their incredible staff who have really taken on the task and dived deep into these numbers. We are on the right track now, colleagues. I want to thank members for giving us this time to work on this issue. The work will continue, and thank you again for your support.
Assistant Minority Leader West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I want to echo the comments of Representative Herod. It's been a privilege to work with the legislators. I also want to thank DOC for engaging us in this process. First and foremost, our Department of Corrections exists for public safety, and we have heard them speak loudly and clearly about their concerns that we keep public safety front of mind always. So I want to stress, in addition to looking at ways to make our Department of Corrections budget more efficient, that we always have to keep in mind that the safety of our citizens and the function that DOC has in that process is critical. This is a department that requires a lot of resources to continue to function. We anticipate that these discussions will continue. But I think one of the critical things that we've discussed as a working group is that there should be a mechanism to have the Department of Corrections function like other departments within our state government. Specifically, that it's our job as a legislature who authorizes funding for this department to set metrics, to set a basis of performance, and to set expectations for where we want the department to be. Through the very creative analysis and work by the JBC staff, I think we have a path forward that puts Colorado on the cutting edge in terms of the way that we're going to fund our Department of Corrections. There can be some, there could be some unexpected events that will come, and I just want to stress that while we're looking at these utilization targets, we have to keep public safety front of mind. Our Plan B and our overflow plans continue to remain the focus of this working group, and we're going to continue to do that work on behalf of this body. So thank you for the opportunity to do this work. Representative Herod, thank you for your leadership. Representative Lee, Representative Willett, thank you for your time and leadership. And members, thank you for your time today.
Further announcements or introductions? Is it on this, Representative Lee? Representative Lee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I, too, commend my colleagues that have been participating in this working group. It's been a eye-opening experience, I think, for everyone to see what's driving the prison increase in Colorado. It mirrors what's going on statewide. I also want, or nationwide, I also want to acknowledge the important interrelated work of community corrections, parole, and with the Department of Corrections, because we are really literally all in this together. And this problem is not going to be solved by DOC alone. It needs to be solved in a cooperative manner. And the work that has been done by the JBC staff, Megan Davidson, to give us a new creative path forward has been extraordinarily helpful. It's innovative, it's creative, and it has great potential to help us get a handle on these issues. But I also want to note that we need to take a big picture look at what's going on in incarceration, not just in Colorado, but nationwide. We reflect what's going on. And what's going on is, I would suggest, overutilization of incarceration in response to criminal offenses. We incarcerate, as we've noted before, more than 5 or 6 times the number of people as incarcerated in other countries. The reason we have prison growth is because we put more people in jail in Colorado and the United States than any other country in the world, and we put them in there for longer periods of time, and they stay there for longer periods of time. There are alternatives which work in other countries, and they can work here. What we know is that a lot of the driving of increased incarceration comes from increased filing of charges by local district attorneys. And when district attorneys file charges and those felonies are sent to the Department of Corrections, they have the state accepting the cost. In fact, the state of Colorado pays $38,000 for each inmate sent by the counties. And the counties, we know, would be better off exercising local drug treatment programs. We know that community drug treatment works better than incarceration, DOC-oriented drug treatment. So programs that divert people from prison is really part of the big picture to reduce incarceration, getting people out of the criminal justice system by other processes that work, such as restorative justice, where there is a 95% success rate. We know that prison does not work. 95, 97% of the people who go to prison get out of prison. 50, 60% of those people who go out of prison go back to prison within 3 years. I would suggest, colleagues, that prison is a failed system. It keeps people off the streets. From that point, it keeps them safe. But to use incarceration as a method of rehabilitation fails. It has been proven to fail. So we need, both in our working group and as members of a legislative body in charge of policy, have to look at a big picture as to what's going on in incarceration and move away from incarceration as a solution for too many problems. Thank you for your work, thank you for your attention, and thank you for your continued participation in this collegial effort to address mass incarceration in Colorado.
Short comments, Representative Salazar. I don't believe that personal privilege has been granted.
I don't think that this is a matter of personal privilege. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then please proceed.
Thank you. You know, when this working group was established a month and a half ago and created by the executive order, I stood up here addressing all of you, and I said that it was my greatest hope that it was successful. I have been skeptical and dubious of any efforts when it comes to Department of Corrections, having dealt with them for so many years being here, and seeing that they're not always good players, that they don't always deal in good faith, not just with the legislature, but also with our other partners like with the parole board, community corrections, and others. So I was a little nervous as to what was going to happen with this task force, but I said that I would put faith in it since it is a bipartisan effort, and Representative Wist and Representative Herod and I have been able to talk about this issue at length and sit through our SMART Act hearings and listening to the information come through. And I had faith in these two individuals to chair this committee and to move it forward with great diligence as well as good faith with all the stakeholders. And as the information started to unfold, as they started to gather more and more information, I think, and it just confirmed what I believe they knew, was that this system is horribly wrong. As Representative Wist is apt to say when he comes up here to the well, it's an empire building of sorts, and we have seen that empire grow $300 million over the past 11 years. It has become a system that feeds on itself and feeds on others, such as the poor and those we want to criminalize all too often, particularly those who suffer from substance abuse issues. And even our Republican Attorney General says that substance abuse is not a criminal issue, but a public health issue. We see the ever-growing amounts of people in our county jails, like in Alamosa. A report was just presented this morning on Colorado Public Radio about what's happening in Alamosa and how they're stacking 3 people high in bunk beds because of so many people being incarcerated as a result of just being a person who's addicted to the substance. This task force, as I said, I had great hopes for, and they delivered. And I'm really, really proud to see that. I'm proud of the fact that we got together bipartisanly to think this issue through, to explore our concerns, and to find the evidence supporting those concerns. I'm proud of the fact that DOC is not going to get its way, hopefully from here on out. That they're just not going to have a check waiting for them here at the General Assembly, that they're going to actually have to prove things in a better, consistent, and more transparent manner before we write them anything anymore. But one of the highlights in this is how the JBC staff, Megan Davidson specifically, how she rose to an occasion quite unlike anything that I've seen. How she developed a plan that is an absolute sea change in the way we look at criminal justice and incarceration. What a refreshing thing to see such teamwork coming from this chamber as well as the Senate. And it took really good leadership to do that. So thank you very much, Representative Herod, Representative Wist. Thank you very much, Representative Willett, as well as Representative Lee, for helping move that leadership in that direction towards something that we've been longing to see for such a long time. What a refreshing thing to be able to come to the well and talk about it this way, isn't it? It really is. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Representative Salazar, and to the team. Further announcements and introductions. Representative Michelson-Janae.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem, and I am just announcing that I will be absent Monday. Have cleared it with the Majority Leader, and with your permission, I will not be here.
Seeing no objection, Representative Michelson Janae will be granted the time excused. Representative Janal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. And once again, I just want to remind the Health Insurance and Environment Committee that we will be meeting at 1:30, and we're hearing 3 bills. Thank you.
Representative Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Not everybody's here, but members, I just wanted to, whether it's solicited or not, make a quick apology for asking for support for a policy, whether it's this year or next year. It was inappropriate on my part as I'm becoming of a legislator. So for whatever it's worth, I just wanted to make a quick apology and say that was something that I was ignorant to and won't make that mistake again. Please accept my apology. Thank you.
Further announcements and introductions. Representative McKean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Representative Coleman, I love you.
Seeing no further announcements and introductions, Madam Majority Leader.
I love you all so much, and I'm just really tired, and I really want to go home, so I move that we stand in recess till Monday, April 3rd at 10 a.m.
Seeing no objection, the House will stand in recess. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I move that we stand in recess till 1 o'clock today. I'll have us stand in adjournment till Monday later on. So I really am tired. Sorry.
1:30? Seeing no objection, the House will stand in recess until 1 o'clock today.